Welcome back to the First and Goal podcast, everyone. I am here with Mitch Weinberg. Today, we are going to kick off the show by talking about underrated and overrated prospects. Starting it off here, let's kick it off with wide receiver Rondale Moore, the Purdue prospect. I think this guy is someone who is being looked at as just slightly underrated. Just slightly underrated. I don't think he is so undervalued and so disrespected to the point where someone needs to be screaming from the top of a hill. But I think he's a very good player that isn't really getting so much like late first round type. I think a lot of people have him more as a early second, mid second player. But I think he deserves that first round talent grade from a lot of people that really aren't giving it to him.
My apologies for the quick Wi-Fi problem. But look, Rondale Moore is a guy that has been consistently slipping throughout most people's draft boards when you looked at it from 2 months ago versus now. I think there's an apparent difference from a guy that was like, oh my gosh, first round pick for sure, to a guy that's like, well, you can kiss him goodbye. But I think I have to agree with Sam. He is slightly underrated. Look, I don't think he's going to be the greatest receiver in this draft, but it's definitely not a guy that should be overlooked.
For sure, should not be overlooked. Slightly overrated, just a little bit. Now let's talk about another wide receiver. Terrace Marshall Jr., the LSU man, this is kind of the opposite of Rondale Moore. Big bodied guy, outside wide receiver. This is a guy that has been trending upwards a little bit, but also a very polarizing prospect. Some people have this guy as like a second, third round type player. Others have him as a first round prospect. I think we have differing opinions on this. I think he's overrated. When I look at his tape, I just don't love the athleticism that he shows on display. We know we saw him run a 4.39, which I'm not sure how reliable that 40 time is, but regardless, it is an impressive 40 time. But really, I don't love 40 times using them as a stat. I mean, they don't really mean much. They don't show game speed. And when I watch Terrace Marshall on film, I'm not impressed by his athleticism. So that's my opinion on that. I think he's overrated.
Well, like I think it depends where you rank him. If you think this is a guy that will go in the first round, like no, I'm sorry, I can't justify any team taking him in the first round, even if it is the Baltimore Ravens, even though it do seems they need a wide receiver. I can't justify them taking a player like him that fits their scheme perfectly in the first round. But what's important to understand is that I don't always look at speed, because if we're looking at speed, I like Elijah. I'm not saying like speed is nothing. 40 times are irrelevant. Take John Ross, perfect example. But Terrence Marshall, I like my big body, physical wide receivers, and when I see Terrence Marshall, that's what I see, and I like it a lot. He's not super athletic. I get it, but there's a lot to be said about this guy, and if you're taking him in the second round, that's his value. If you pick him earlier, overrated. If you pick him later than that, then I don't understand how he slips that far.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to personal preference with this decision. I think we've talked about this before. For me, I like to see a lot of athleticism. I like to see the tools, being able to use your natural ability and turn it into actual football skills. But again, comes down to personal preference, and that is why I think he's overrated. And you think just about right, maybe a little bit underrated. And now this is another guy that is a little bit polarizing. Some people think he's a second round player, some people think he's a third round player, and some people even think he's a day three prospect. Michael Carter, the UNC running back. This is the guy that I think is a little bit overrated because people are talking about him being better than Javonte Williams and sometimes close to Travis Etienne. I don't understand this at all because saying that Michael Carter is a mid second round or even a second round prospect, it doesn't compute with me because I don't think his ability to read the holes in the offensive line and his overall vision and processing skills of the play is there yet. He likes to bounce it outside way too much. He likes to get to the perimeter way too much. And I'm just not a fan of his overall game style and what he tries to do on a down to down basis. I think this is more of a guy that's a third round prospect, a mid third round guy. And yes, I like his natural ability. I like his natural speed and athleticism. He's just his football IQ isn't really fully developed, and something again, something that's very coachable, but definitely not the most pro ready player.
I mean, Michael Carter, he's 5'8". As I mentioned numerous times on this podcast, my podcast, I like my running backs physical. And I think Michael Carter does a lot of great things. But when you compare him to the other running backs in this draft, I just don't see how this guy is a round 2 player or even round 3. I think this is a guy that it belongs in round 4, round 5, and needs time to develop. There's
Round 5.
round 4, 5. I think my main issue is that when you look at what teams need running backs, like there are not many, and the ones that do need running backs, they'll end up taking them earlier. I don't think he'll be round 5, round 4, round 5 because of his ability, but it's because of team needs. And like the teams that need a running back, there are tons of guys that you can easily value ahead of him depending on your scheme.
Gotcha. So that's more of a projection.
Yeah, no, not based on his talent. Based on his talent, he's round 3, round 4 for sure. But based on like team needs, that's where he falls.
Okay. Now going on to another running back, a guy that we touched on earlier, Travis Etienne, the Clemson running back. Now, this is a guy that I don't want to say is polarizing, but some people think he could be taken, or earlier in the draft process. I wouldn't say this is a idea now, but some people thought he could have been taken as high as 16 by the Arizona Cardinals. And this is also a guy that some people have mocked in like 60th to the Buffalo Bills. So a wide variety of opinions on Travis Etienne. I think he's just right. I think a early second round pick is pretty much exactly where he should be drafted. Because think about it, players like Jonathan Taylor were taken with early second round picks last year. And while, yes, I do think Travis Etienne is a better prospect than Jonathan Taylor was a year ago, slightly better, not too much. Jonathan Taylor was taken with pick 42. I think Travis Etienne should be taken in the 30s in the second round. And I think that's pretty much where he's being valued right now. So I think that's pretty much just right.
I mean, when I think of Travis Etienne, as you mentioned, polarizing. He played with Trevor Lawrence. He played in a top offense in college, and running backs games they do transfer to like they transfer pretty well, in my opinion. I think that running backs have a pretty easy time adjusting to the NFL versus the NCAA, like just regarding scheme, because talking quarterbacks, not all of them do. But when people tell me that Travis Etienne's the number 1 running back in the draft, which is what I've heard a fair bit of, if I'm going to be honest, I think you're crazy, and that's where I say he's overrated. But with his where his actual value lies, which is a mid-second round pick, I think that's just right. But it really depends where where you value these guys, because I value this guy as like second round. I don't value him as anything earlier or later. I think like pick hit the Cardinals second round pick if they took him, like I'd be very happy. I don't love James Conner, but like he had one good year, and I think Travis Etienne in that offense would be really, really great.
Definitely agree with that. More of a second round prospect. Now, this is a guy that I really disagree with where people are putting him. This is a guy that's Jayson Oweh, a Penn State edge rusher. A lot of people have him as a late first round prospect and a guy that is most people's 4th or 5th edge rusher, ranked edge rusher. And I really disagree with this. I think he's more of a late second, early third round type player, even though he will be taken a lot higher because of his athletic ability. And I think people are getting too caught up on athletic ability. Athletic ability for edge rushers, well, nice. It's not something that I can sit there and say will really elevate his game to the point where you can say he's a bona fide first round pick. I mean, athleticism is a good thing. It's something you like to have, but edge rushers can't win in the NFL if they only have athleticism to their name. Jayson Oweh is the guy that is raw, and athleticism is his biggest strength. That isn't something that I love to see from an edge rusher prospect because he hasn't consistently shown to me that he can win when not using dominant athleticism, which is something that he will be faced with and be tasked with at the next level in the NFL. So I think he's overrated.
Look, I think based on his intangibles, I think that he could be he could be a first round pick based on his intangibles. But look, my thing is he doesn't have enough experience. He, as you mentioned, very raw as a prospect. I can't sit here and tell you that he's going to be a first round pick, but if a team thinks that he can sit behind a guy and take a year to develop, like Baltimore, for example, if they ended up taking him, I think that's fine. But if you're going to expect him to get down in 3 point stance in NFL week one, I don't think that can happen. But if you're going to sit him behind a guy like Calais Campbell, who definitely knows what he's doing and get some experience, that is a value pick.
Absolutely a guy that does need to work on his game a little bit, round out the edges. Now, this is a guy that if you've been listening to my podcast by myself on the First and Goal channel, you know, you know my thoughts on him. This is going to be Mac Jones, the quarterback. I think this guy is grossly overrated. I mean, we're talking about a prospect that is being talked about possibly being picked third overall, and I can't see why. For the life of me, I can't see why he's being regarded as a top three or not top three prospect, but a guy that could potentially be justified as being taken third overall. He's a smart player, but he's not going to make those huge winning plays for you. He's more of a game manager. He's a smart guy, he makes accurate decisions, but he isn't. I wouldn't say he's such a game changer at the position. He's a distributor, right? Think of him as a good old school point guard in basketball, right? He's the guy who's going to get it to a Michael Jordan, a LeBron James, but he's not going to make the winning play. I mean, that's really who Mac Jones is. And I don't think that those guys can be taken with top 3 picks because when you take a top 10, you're looking for guys who are going to win you games. And I just don't think Mac Jones is going to be able to do that by himself.
Look, if you're a Madden guy and you're looking at like archetypes, Mac Jones is a field general. And if you're a Madden person, you know you're not taking a field general at quarterback. You want a scrambler. You want a dual threat. You want someone that's athletic and can get you winning plays. And I think that he gets a lot of hype, especially because he had a really great year at Alabama. This is not going to – Sam and I are not sitting here saying that he definitely had a terrible year. He was a Heisman finalist for a reason. But – at the end of the day, like, I don't understand what the Niners see in him except for like Jimmy Garoppolo 2.0. I could see like that type of situation happening. And they're getting rid of Jimmy Garoppolo, like threatening to basically trying to get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo for a reason. And it's for the reason that he's not a guy that's going to make the winning play. And Mac Jones, like people like to make the assumption, oh my gosh, he's so good because he went to X school. Like, it's the same thing with Justin Fields. I know we're not talking about him, but, like, he went to Ohio State. He won. Good. But when you throw him into an NFL system, not good.
Exactly. You made a great point about Mac Jones being a similar player to what Jimmy Garoppolo is currently, who is obviously the starting quarterback for the 49ers now. Now, this is a guy that I know you're really high on. Richie Grant, the safety from UCF. I'll let you talk about him first.
Oh, baby. Okay. I've been doing my fair bit of looking on this guy, and it really depends on where you rank him. I value him as a second-round prospect, and at that point, it's just right. Because if we're looking at safety, Trayvon Moehrig is probably going to be safety, defensive back. You can really put him anywhere, truthfully. Number 1, taken in this draft, no doubt about it. But there's so much to be said about Richie Grant. Except I don't love his man coverage ability. But beyond that, there's so much that I love about the guy. Like in pass protection in general, I think he does a really great job. But when you put a man-to-man on a receiver, he can't do it for the life of him. Or his tackle attempt. I think it was his tape I was watching. His tackle attempts were pretty bad too.
I will say though, agree. Some of the tackling attempts by some of these safeties are pretty poor to say the least. I mean, I watched Trevor Moehrig's tapes a little bit earlier in the draft process, or actually I watched quite a few of his games, but I watched some of his tape obviously earlier in the draft process, and consistently some of the tackling attempts, I mean, he would just dive at the guy's feet and just miss completely. I mean, it was kind of laughable at some of these guys' tackling attempts, but listen, Moehrig is still the first-rated prospect, so I mean, he's doing something right. Richie Grant, though, like you said, the zone coverage, I think it's very good, well-rounded. Man coverage, an issue, but something that can be taught, something that can be groomed. Still, obviously, shows a lot of room to grow, like all of the best prospects. A good prospect, and like you, I mean, we came to the conclusion on this guy kind of on our own. I mean, we both watched this guy's tape, and I agree with you. I do think he's an underrated prospect. Definitely a guy that I do like, the safety out of UCF. He's actually my third ranked safety prospect in this class. Now, moving on, we have a little bit of a different segment here. We're going to do fantasy fits for skill position prospects. So, where could these possibly players go where they would be where their fantasy potential would be maximized? So now let's get into it. We have one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, and a flex that we are going to get into here. Starting off with the quarterback, I have Justin Fields, or we both are using Justin Fields, and I have him going to the 49ers because Kyle Shanahan is an offensive genius. I think Kyle Shanahan would be able to do a lot of smart things with Justin Fields, put him in the best opportunity to succeed. And there are also a lot of good weapons there. George Kittle, obviously a fantastic tight end. Brandon Ayuk, great run after catch wide receiver, very reliable guy. And then Deebo Samuel, one of the best run after catch wide receivers in the league, great slot receiver. I think there are a lot of weapons here for Fields to succeed and a great offensive minded head coach.
I mean, it's almost fantasy season, okay? Because after the draft, we talk season preview and fantasy. That's my favorite time, and I know it's Sam's too. We love fantasy. Everyone does. But when Justin Fields, if we're gonna compare, like this Niners offense is pretty good, but I want to put Fields in the best like when you look at wide receivers, tight ends, and like not really running backs in this case, but for the sake of it, running backs. I think that Justin Fields going to Denver, though, like pretty unlikely. Let's see how the draft board shapes out. I think that looks really good. Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler, and Cortland Sutton coming back off the injury. Noah Fant, and the offensive line is looking pretty good. He has so many weapons, so many targets that I think it raises his fantasy value along with those around him. And Vic Fangio, not the greatest offensive mind, like not super great. And I don't know, like if Denver elects to go with Justin Fields, I don't know what he's looking like with Drew Lock, but you'd assume he'd take him over, especially considering how brutal Drew Lock was this year. But Justin Fields is a good player, and I think putting him in one of the best offensive situations you could possibly be in would be most beneficial for him.
Keeping it going now, getting to our running back one. This is going to be Travis Etienne. And I have Travis Etienne going to the Bills. Now, I'm not sure this is the most realistic situation because, just because of where the Bills sit, I think pick 30 is probably too early to take him, and pick 60, I believe 61 is probably too late to take Travis Etienne. So, realistically, he probably won't land here, but if in some case he does, I think it would be really good for his fantasy stock because Josh Allen, very good quarterback, obviously, hasn't really had that safety blanket throughout his career. I think Travis Etienne out of the backfield could become that player. Offers a lot of value out of the backfield, and Josh Allen is a guy who will be able to get Travis Etienne the ball out of the backfield in receiving situations. Also, this is a team and an offense that struggled to run the ball at all last year, which obviously they're going to be looking to change this season because it was one of their biggest weaknesses and one of the biggest reasons why, their downfall eventually happens. So they're going to be looking to run the ball. Travis Etienne, very good running back, offers a lot of run after contact and yards after contact, yards after catch ability. So this is a guy that I think fits really, really well here, and his explosiveness also fits with Josh Allen's arm talent because this guy can run routes. So if you run him on a wheel route or something like that, Josh Allen will be able to get him the ball.
I mean, absolutely. We talked about this numerous times, how the Bills were unable to run the ball and ultimately led to their demise. Just overall how brutal that ended up being. But I think the Steelers can really benefit from. Look, the Steelers right now don't have a running back, and the Steelers are in my opinion. I think they're a pretty balanced offense, like run, pass, like pretty old school. I think Mike Tomlin does a great job, like play calling overall, and Ben Roethlisberger is entering his final year, literally just year. I think this is it for him. That's the end of the line. And when you bring in a new quarterback, probably going to implement a spread offense because that's what every quarterback is running in college nowadays. Having a running back like Travis Etienne in that system looks really good, especially with the other wide receivers that are looking there. We have Juju Smith, don't know if he'll be there for much longer. Deontay Johnson, who is unreliable, but gets it done when he seems to need to. And then Chase Claypool, who I think is a tad bit overrated, but I think is still going to be a phenomenal player heading into next year. I think in an offense of so many weapons, it just makes sense that he'd have a pretty decent stock here.
Coming up with our running back too. Obviously, this just to keep in mind, this isn't our list of running back and position rankings, but running back number 2, just because we picked him, is gonna be Javonte Williams, the UNC running back. I have this guy going to the Steelers, the team that Mitch has Travis Etienne going to. I think just Javonte Williams is a more well-rounded running back, and he can do a lot more for this team. He's a much better downhill runner than Travis Etienne, but is also very explosive. His cuts are very good at getting to the outside and getting yards after contact, and just extra yardage, right? Get very good at getting extra yardage, and that's something that I think will get valued very much so in the Steelers offense because, they're kind of traditionally, they're a ground and pound team, and Javonte Williams is a downhill runner. So he fits the system, and he's pretty much exactly what they're looking for because he does offer value as a pass catcher as well. He's explosive, so that's obviously a huge plus, but he does also fit the Steelers system and what they are looking for in a running back, and specifically a 3-down running back.
I mean, exactly. I think it's pretty obvious that the Steelers need a running back, but of course, I have Travis Etienne going to them. So I have Javonte Williams going to Tampa. Now, this is a very rather interesting pick in my opinion because they have Leonard Fournette, they have Rojo. Like, I don't think those prospects are comparable to Javonte Williams. I think Javonte Williams is a downhill runner. Javonte Williams is what Leonard Fournette wants to be, in my opinion. Like, very similar playing styles, but Javonte Williams is a fresh of breath air. And I'm not saying cut both of them,
Breath of fresh air.
like a breath of fresh air, like something new into
fresh,
that offense.
fresh of breath air.
Is that what I said? Oh my days. Whatever. I think that there's enough to say about this guy that he's a downhill runner and exactly very physical, and putting him into Bruce Arians' system could be something new and exciting that Tampa could lean on for years to come. I get it. Running backs are replaceable. I hear it all the time. But you know what? I don't think that I'm not saying Javonte Williams is a generational talent, not what I'm saying. But this is a guy that I don't see like any type of running back just like him in the draft. I don't see it.
Moving on to wide receivers now, Elijah Moore. Now, I have him going to the Bengals, and I think this is a really good fit because Elijah Moore, obviously very quick, very shifty, good route runner, and very fast. Smaller guy. Pretty much everything that the Bengals don't have right now. He would be the starting slot wide receiver from day one immediately because they literally have no one else who will be able to compete with Moore for the job on the roster. So giving Joe Burrow another reliable weapon who is good in run after catch situations, can be moved around the field. He can play in the backfield even if you need him to, because that's how athletic he is. I like him as a prospect, and going to the Bengals, he would have an immediate role, an immediate starting role, and there'd be no real competition for him at that spot. So he would, obviously, it's not realistic to say he'd be playing 100% of the snaps at slot, especially since he's a rookie, but he would absolutely be the day one starter and the clear cut starter. So he'd be getting a lot of snaps with a younger quarterback who will, again, probably want to get the ball out quickly. Elijah Moore is the guy who, more often than not, he's going to be looking to get the ball to and dump the ball off to when in those short yardage situations. So I think Moore's value will be maximized here with the Bengals just because of the increased role that he will have on this team.
I think that's pretty fair. Looking at that receiving core with Tyler Boyd. So I think that there's enough to be said that he can go there. I actually have him going to Jacksonville. Interestingly enough, that wide receiver core I think is extremely underrated. Now with Marvin Jones, I think DJ Chark is a phenomenal player, and I think he deserves to be a wide receiver one. I think last year, just beyond the injuries, it proves that he deserves that spot. Now, this is interesting because can Elijah Moore be like swap in and out with Laviska Shenault? Because you can't forget they drafted him last year. I mean, as Sam said, he's not going to play 100% of the snaps as a rookie, but this is a guy that he is speed. Okay, I hate to quote Lightning McQueen, but this man is speed. And when Trevor Lawrence is going to be looking down the field for a wide receiver, I think having four wide receivers, having Shenault, Chark, Jones, and Moore all on the same team, it's similar to a lot of the other teams in the NFL, or at least what they're trying to do. It's like, who am I going to cover? Like, well, what are we supposed to do against this? So I think that it's going to force a lot of dime out of defenses, obviously. But I mean, having four great receivers never hurt a team.
Exactly. Now going on to our second wide receiver. This one's going to be Devontae Smith, and this is a guy that I think will be very good with the Detroit Lions. And now, before you turn off of this podcast and go report me for not knowing what I'm talking about, I think this makes a lot of sense because the Jared Goff situation does not really scare me if you're the Lions and if you're Devontae Smith. Because think about Robert Woods, think about Cooper Kupp, two very, very good wide receivers. During all their years with the Rams, Jared Goff was their quarterback. Robert Woods, great fantasy wide receiver, especially because of the volume of balls he caught. Same thing with Cooper Kupp. Both guys got over 1,000 yards consistently with Jared Goff as their quarterback. Both got some solid touchdown numbers as well. This is a quarterback that doesn't struggle. Listen, he's not the best quarterback, but one thing that can be said about him is he doesn't struggle in terms of fantasy. He doesn't bring down talent around him. He doesn't. The effect on wide receivers that he's throwing the ball to is very minimal. And that's something that I think we're going to see continue with Devontae Smith because I think Smith's ceiling is higher than Woods, is higher than Kupp. His catch, I don't want to say radius because he isn't, obviously his wingspan isn't ridiculous, but his contested catch ability, his ability to catch 50-50 balls is incredible. So also coming here, he will be the clear-cut wide receiver one from day one. No other real rivals. He's going to be getting the majority of the targets. And when you get the majority of the targets, that leads to catches, and that is great for PPR leagues. I think the volume of balls he will catch with the Lions is going to help your team out a lot. And also, the Jared Goff situation doesn't really scare me at all.
I mean, I think Sam, when he took the Lions, I'm not saying it was realistic, which it is, but I think Sam went with the safe pick. Now, where I have him going, it's very, very interesting for fantasy owners because I have him going to the Giants. Don't click off this podcast and act as if I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay? We're looking at, I think the perfect example of this would probably be in Dallas, okay? Where the Cowboys have Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, okay? And one of them is going to get covered by the best corner on the team. Then the other one, you know what? He's going to be open. That is what happens when you have two great receivers on your team. Now, the Giants have Kenny Golladay, and they're going to have Devonta Smith. And they also have Evan Ingram and Saquon when he's healthy. So I think there's enough to say that having a great wide receiver two on your roster, it will end up benefiting you in the long run. The only huge conflict, and if you see Sam's face right now, if you're watching on YouTube, he's like, "What are you talking about?" The only huge issue is Daniel Jones is your quarterback. Is that worth it's a high risk, high reward situation, in my opinion. I think Sam can obviously agree.
I think there's only risk.
High risk.
I mean, are you kidding me? I don't trust Daniel Jones to have a good fantasy wide receiver on that team.
Again, also, if you're a dynasty player, him going to the Giants also fits perfect.
Because hopefully Daniel Jones is
gone hopefully gone. But
Oh.
if he ends up getting his head out of his rear, I think that this could lead to a great year. And I don't think Daniel Jones doesn't strike me as a great quarterback. I'm sorry, but like honestly, the Giants could in the last late round take a quarterback. I think they can also benefit greatly from that. Like I don't know, Kellen Mond probably would be a reach for them. Like I think Sam Ellinger could be interesting in like round 5 or 6. Like just saying, I think that could be interesting. And if I'd say like PPR wise, maybe not the greatest standard. You could risk it, but if you're going dynasty, it's perfect fit.
Now the flex to wrap up our excuse me, hiccups. Now the flex to wrap up our fantasy team. This is going to be Kenneth Gainwell, the running back wide receiver hybrid from Memphis. I think this guy really fits well with the Jets because the Jets don't really have a super explosive player. Kenneth Gainwell is a guy that if you want that explosiveness on the field, this is going to be the guy that you're going to have to put on the football field to get that because they're not going to have anyone else who brings to the table what Gainwell does, right? So the explosiveness that he brings will be utilized to its fullest as a slot receiver or as a running back out of the backfield. So for a third, fourth round pick, I think he's going to get a lot of touches and a lot of opportunities to be successful.
I mean, I think there's enough to say that like the Jets obviously can go running back. LaMichael Pirine is not great, truthfully. I picked him up. He was not amazing, but I never tell him that. So I think like seeing that like Gainwell played in Memphis, wide receiver, running back hybrid, similar to Antonio Gibson, similar to Tony Pollard. I think that the Cardinals can benefit greatly from that. They don't really have a running back. I don't consider James Conner like so great. I think they would have been better off just keeping Chase Edmonds and signing uh, uh, Connor to the deal. And overall, I think Kyler Murray having a receiving back, that's just like I don't know how many carries he'll get, but I know he'll definitely get a decent amount of targets, especially considering D Hop, AJ Green, and you can even put him in as wide receiver 3. Like Christian Kirk is not fantastic.
Now moving on to a new different segment. Me and Mitch came up with this segment that we think is going to be really fun. Today, we both came up with 7 questions that we are going to ask the other person about this upcoming draft. Each person, the opposite person, the answering person, is going to have to answer the question in under 20 seconds. Rapid fire round of questions just to answer them as plainly as possible. So starting it off, I'll go first. Number 1. This one, I'm sure you have a lot of opinions on already. You are the Cowboys general manager. You are Jerry Jones, and you are sitting at pick 10. Which cornerback would you rather take, J.C. Horn or Patrick Surtain?
I mean, Surtain, like initially I had Horn, but I think Surtain's an overall better prospect, and Horn in my opinion, you could probably trade back to end up getting. So either way, I think that if Dallas just goes corner, I'll be happy overall. All right, so should I ask my question?
Yep, you go.
Okay, I did not know that. Is DeVonta Smith's weight a cause for concern?
I think so. Because you look at now, I don't think it obviously wasn't an issue in college because he didn't really get injured in college, but in the NFL, bigger bodies, people are hitting harder, people are hitting with more momentum coming up behind them. It's just a more physical game with more physical guys, and so it's definitely a cause for concern. Am I going to blatantly come out and say, maybe we should let him slip 5, 10 picks because of it? No. But if you are the team, you need to make sure he bulks up a little bit because it's definitely something to keep your eye on that could potentially become an issue. Now, number 2, I think you kind of answered this one a little bit earlier, but do the Broncos need to take a quarterback at pick 9 or should they trade up for one and get one earlier?
I mean, look, I think what's important is that they monitor the Falcons pick 4 because if they go quarterback, they have to trade up. If the Falcons don't go quarterback, like against basically every rumor that I've heard so far, then I think they stay at 9. Do they need to? Yes. Here's why. Because they're wasting such a young, talented roster and having the worst quarterback in the league. Yes, he's the worst quarterback in the league. As your quarterback is unacceptable, and I think Drew Lock has run out of chances. Heading into my second question, what is the overall best positional group in the NFL draft?
This is a tough one because there are a lot of them. I mean, you could say edge rusher. There are a lot of really good edge rushers. Cornerback could be in the running, but I think it's got to be wide receiver. I mean, we saw it last year. You could probably say that was the best positional group. Um, I think it's the same thing this year. You have the big three wide receivers who could all have wide receiver one potential down the road, and not only wide receiver one potential, top 10 wide receiver in the league potential. And then you have other guys like Rondell Moore, Kadarius Toney, Terrace Marshall Jr., Elijah Moore, even Tylan Wallace. I mean, guys all the way to Jalen Darden. I mean, I'm thinking of more as we come. And there are 10, 15 more guys that could be starting wide receivers eventually down the road who I just think have tremendous value and are tremendous players. So, yeah, I think wide receiver is definitely has the highest positional value out of any position in this entire draft class. Now, for my third question, again, talking about quarterbacks, should the Bears or the Washington football team try and trade up to get a quarterback within the top 5 picks?
And first of all, let's talk about the Washington football team. I think with them signing Ryan Fitzpatrick is not necessary. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is like a like top 20 quarterback, like maybe 2019, depends where you rank everyone else. But he's a guy that I think deserves a starting job. And overall, I don't think that that Washington needs to trade up for a quarterback this year. Next year, I think it's a necessity, not this year. And the Bears, they already screwed up their chances. I mean, they don't have any movable pieces to trade up. That's the thing. So I don't see how they can end up like overall trading up, and I don't think it's worth it for them. Now, my third question, the answer to this, like, which team do you think will screw up their first round pick? Last year, we know who screwed up their first round pick. They'll name it anonymous, but we all know who screwed up their first round pick last year. But who will screw it up this year?
I think now this is a hard one to predict, obviously, but I think the one, maybe the one with the highest potential to screw it up could be the Eagles because you're sitting there as the Eagles, and also they have a track record of not drafting so well, especially in the first round, especially last year, taking Jalen Rager over Justin Jefferson, who was picked just a pick later. You look at the Eagles, they're in a kind of a weird situation because if we're being real, all three of the top three wide receivers could be taken by pick 12. Michael Parsons could be taken by pick 12. And that kind of leaves you in an open situation, right? So J.C. Horn could be an acceptable pick. Maybe don't really want to go with him there. I could see them reaching on maybe a wide receiver, maybe a linebacker that probably isn't worth pick 12. Now, would I say it'd be a complete screw up right from the get go? Maybe not, but I think the potential is there for them to reach on a player who isn't really worth the value of pick 12. Now, coming up with my fourth pick, going back to college and running backs, guys that we've talked about a lot today. Which UNC running back would you rather draft? Javonte Williams or Michael Carter?
I mean, we kind of just talked about it like 5 seconds ago. Javonte Williams is at least 2 rounds better
Mm-hmm.
than him. So, yeah, Javonte Williams is a second round guy. If it's first round, well, brace yourselves. Um, Going on to my fourth question, who is going to be the diamond in the rough in the upcoming NFL draft? Last year, I'm not saying like it has to be who's going to be James Robinson because that's like nearly impossible to predict. But like, who do you think could be like a Chase Claypool guy that's like, well, why was he picked there ahead of like a bunch of guys that didn't deserve to be picked ahead of him?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Um, hmm, kind of difficult. I think I'm not so confident in this one, but I think Kenny Gainwell, a guy that we were just talking about previously, has a really high ceiling because he very versatile, very explosive, does a lot of things really, really well and at a high level. Opted out in 2020, which lost him a lot of draft momentum, and really didn't build up his draft stock as much as maybe some people would have liked to see. That's why he's more valued as a third or fourth round prospect. But I definitely think with the right team, with the right coaching, he could become a very good starter in the NFL. And we could look back at him and say, yeah, he should have been taken higher. Now, coming on with my fifth question, over or under 3.5 first round trades?
I mean, look, if I'm talking like gambling man wise, you have to go under. You don't always hit the under in every case, but ever in the NFL draft, there's gonna be so many trades. There were like one or two last year. Like if you went like 1.5, that would have been a bit more difficult. We're talking 1.5. I can probably see the over on that, but 3.5. When was the last time there were like three trades, like on draft night? Like you never see it, which is unfortunate. Just like play for player trades, we don't see it. I'd like to see them. Doesn't happen quite as often as we like. Now, number 5, does Kyle Pitts, the greatest tight end prospect we've ever seen, according to everyone, and I see it justified. Does he deserve to be a top 5 pick?
That is absolutely yes. However, I'm going to answer a different question from you. Similar question. However, that is absolutely yes. I don't think that's debatable. I'm going to answer, will he be a top 5 pick? Because I think that's a much more intriguing question. No, I don't think he will be a top 5 pick because I think realistically, you're talking 4 quarterbacks in the top 4, possibly a 5th quarterback at 5. If it isn't,
please do. Miami, if you're watching this, get rid of Tua while you can.
If it isn't a quarterback at 5, I think the Bengals are probably going to take Penei Sewell, offensive tackle, protect Joe Burrow. So I don't think he will be a top 5 pick, even though he does deserve to be. Now, number 6, the second to last question of mine. Who is the better slot receiver, Kadarius Toney or Rondale Moore?
I mean, a lot of the honestly, I've heard a lot more Rondale Moore, and I think there's a lot more that I like about him. Like when we're talking like Purdue players, especially, like I don't love a lot of Purdue players. I couldn't think of the best Purdue player, but this is one of the best Purdue prospects we've seen in a long, long time. And Kadarius Toney, he played in Florida, and Kyle Trask had a phenomenal year, and so did Kyle Pitts. So like, it's a lot harder when you're on a star-studded offense versus when you're on the Boilermakers, and it's like, what do you have going for you? All right, now on to my second to last question. Who is that draft prospect that everyone continues to sleep on? What I mean by this, obviously, it's like, okay, I think this guy's good. Meh, he's okay, but you're standing on a hill for this guy.
Everyone continues to sleep on.
We all know who I thought it was last year, and he's sewering me every single day, and it makes me sad every time I think about it.
Now this is a tough one. Now I want to talk about a guy that, I don't know. This is difficult. Give me a second. Dwayne Eskridge, actually. This is a guy that you talked about leading up to the Senior Bowl. And yeah, he had a great Senior Bowl. Everyone was talking about him for a week, and then everyone forgot about him. No one continued to talk about him. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why. It's not like he had a bad game after the Senior Bowl. I mean, the season was over. We saw his tape, and his tape looks really good. What he shows to me is
speed,
athleticism, like you said, speed, quickness, agility, all that good stuff that Rondale Moore has, Dwayne Eskridge and Kadarius Toney have. Dwayne Eskridge is just as good of an athlete. Now, is he as good of a prospect? Is he as good as a wide receiver? No, but the potential is there. He showed at times that he can be a really, really talented wide receiver. This is a guy that continues to not be valued as good as I think he is and should be a late second round, early third round pick. Now, my final question, rank these players. Now, this is, I think, is a difficult one. One I think that is probably the toughest one here. Rank these 3 players: Gregory Rousseau, Azeez Ojulari, and Jalen Phillips.
That's a great question. As we mentioned, like, who are the best positional groups? Edge rushers Definitely has to be up there. One of my personal favorites. We're gonna rank him one, of course, Jalen Phillips out of, I believe, Miami.
Yep.
I think that there's a lot of liked about this guy. Russo, unfortunately, his draft stock has dropped a lot because this is a guy that everyone probably like like before the season, mid-season, was like, oh, this guy's a first round pick. I'm not saying he's not a first round pick, but I see a lot more people having Ajulari ranked ahead of him, myself included, unfortunately. So my ranking, to answer your question, Jalen Phillips 1, Ajulari 2, and Russo 3. Now on to my rank. I think this one might be a little easy, but you know what? It is what it is. Rank these players. We have Jeremiah Owusu, I don't know, just JOK for the sake of it, Zaven Collins, and Nick Bolton.
Yeah, this one's definitely a little bit easier for
A
me.
little bit.
Number one, Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. I love his versatility, everything he can do, flies around the field, good hitter as well. Number two, this one gets a little bit harder because I definitely see people who like Nick Bolton more than Zaven Collins. However, I'm not one of those people. I definitely like Zaven Collins more than Nick Bolton. Again, versatility that he brings to the table. Won the Defensive Player of the Year, I believe, the Bednarik Award in college football this past season. Really improved the draft stock quite a bit. And then number three, Nick Bolton. I do really like Bolton, one of my favorite prospects throughout this entire draft class. Just not so sure he is better than Zaven Collins at this point. So that is going to wrap it up for episode 45 of the First and Goal podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. And Mitch and Sam signing off until next week.